Good evening, everybody. My name's Matt Poynton, and welcome to this, the one of the series of the webinars for the Hong Konger community run by the TUC, the Trade Unions Congress, and West Midlands Combined Authority, in partnership with the local Hong Konger community and the National Career Service. Now, there's two faces on here that if you've been to any of our webinars before, you will know who they are, so I'm not going to introduce them now. But the first thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to also ask Tai Shing to repeat it in Cantonese, is this webinar is different than the others because today we don't have Cantonese translation. Okay, our translators were busy, so we don't have translation. We will talk slowly and clearly, and the webinar is geared towards Hong Kongers, but we don't have the Cantonese translation. However, we do have Hong Kongers coming on afterwards to talk about their experiences. I will pass over to Tai Shing and he can explain what I just said and also talk about the Hong Kongers that are coming on.
Okay, 多謝 Mac，thanks Mac。I used to cannot this to introduce this webinar。大家好啊，我係大成啦，係啦，咁我係其實今次係身份係一個英倫故事嘅代表啦，係啦，咁我哋都同呢個全國英國裏邊最大一個工會 TUC 一齊去合辦，同埋呢個 Training Centre 嗰邊一齊去合辦呢個嘅講座啦。係今次嘅講座主要係關於喺英國做一個嘅司機，職業司機係啦，咁主要都環繞可能係一啲嘅巴士司機啦，或者貨車司機啦，同埋一啲 Uber 啊等等呢啲嘅司機裏邊咧，係需要有啲乜嘢嘅條件啦，係啦，同埋即係最基本一啲要求係點樣嘅，係啦，咁咧個講座咧就會用英文進行，有 PowerPoint 嘅，佢哋會講得慢少少嘅，咁就1個鐘左右到，1個鐘之後咧，咁我哋就會有分組時間嘅，咁你哋大家再 check email 咧，我哋應該會寄咗2條 link 俾大家嘅，同埋我都會將嗰2條 link 咧會擺落個 chat box 嗰度嘅，即係如果你哋有興趣想了解多啲。譬如巴士司機嘅，咁我哋會有一個香港嘅朋友咧，會做一個 sharing 啦。如果你有興趣了解多啲送外賣嗰方面嗰啲點做嗰啲司機嘅話咧，咁我都有另外2位朋友咧，都去分組嗰陣時會即係去同大家 share 嘅，係啦。咁亦都佢哋都熟呢度啲法例啊、啲條例嗰啲嘢嘅，係啦。咁如果你聽咁 talk 裏邊有啲咩唔明嘅話咧，都可以 hold 住等間係啦，再喺嗰陣時可以問翻佢哋咧，佢哋都可以解釋翻俾大家聽嘅，係啦。咁咧咁唔好意思，因為原本我哋都想再初步個翻譯嘅，但係個翻譯都今日有啲唔係幾舒服，係啦。咁同埋我諗都我哋試過幾次經驗咧，都唔係好深嘅，係啦個 PowerPoint 係啦。咁同埋就佢都會講得好慢啦，係啦。咁同埋亦都我之後咧，我哋會盡快會 send 翻個 email 俾大家，將嗰個 PowerPoint 去 send 翻俾大家睇翻咁樣嘅，係啦。咁咧跟住完咗之後咧，我哋都會喺分組裏邊咧，我哋都會 form 一個嘅香港人嘅關於即係嘅司機嘅 group 嘅，係啦。即係喺英國呢邊係啦，如果大家有興趣入嘅話，或者想更加多啲交流去深入一啲嘅話咧，跟住只可以加入我哋個 West Group 裏邊嘅。OK， 咁我就唔阻太多時間啦，咁我俾時間俾 Training Centre 嗰邊啦。OK，my Cantonese introduction is finished. The webinar the teacher can start now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, before we start the webinar, a couple of other things. If you've missed the webinars we ran before, we did one for teaching assistant jobs. We've done one, I think it was logistics, and also in working for the healthcare sector. They are actually available as a recording on the Union Learn YouTube channel, and Yusuf can post the link in there later. And so if you want to watch one of the old webinars, that is something you can do. Of course, it's not as good as if it's live, but they are available to watch. And these are not the only webinars we run. So the TUC is running some more webinars. These are for everybody, not just Hong Kongers, but you're more than welcome to come in. And on the 15th of May, there will be a webinar with the Workers' Music Association at 2:00 in the afternoon. That's UK time, 2:00 in the afternoon. And we will be doing a webinar all about music with the Workers' Music Association. And on the 24th of May, we will be running a webinar with a famous comedian. Her name is Sadia Azmat, and she'll be talking to us about how to become a comedian, how to get into comedy in the UK, and also how comedy can help your public speaking. So if you don't really want a driving job and you really want to be on stage and be a comedian, then come along to that webinar. That's on the 24th of May. We don't have a time yet. It will probably be 6:30, but that's not 100% sure yet. So those are the two webinars we've got coming up. One other important announcement, and I will let Tai-Shing say a little bit about this, but we have a May Day event on the 13th of May. So that is an event where we meet face to face. That is not online. It is at 47 Summer Lane in Birmingham, and that is the TUC and the CWU offices. And it's we've got classes, we've got workshops for the kids. Some of the unions will be there. There'll be food. There'll be Hong Kong tea. It's free, so come along. Tai-Shing, do you want to explain a little bit more about that event?
OK， we usually take this to explain。喺5月13號嘅晏晝咧，我哋都會有一個嘅叫做勞工日嘅，勞工嘅分 day 咁樣嘅，係啦，咁啊可以一家大細嚟啦。係啦，咁係會去伯明翰市中心裏邊嗰個 TUC 嘅總部咧，咁我哋會喺個總部裏邊參觀啦，同埋啲講座俾大家啦，咁亦都有啲 workshop 啦等等俾啲小朋友嘅，咁我哋已經揾咗啲嘅即係專係教小朋友嘅嘅 training centre 啦，咁你去啦，咁同埋嗰日都會即係有一啲嘅香港，其實都訂緊一啲嘅香港嘅餐嘅下午茶咧，係俾即係大家一齊重去聚咁樣嘅，咁啊希望藉住嗰日咧能夠去了解多啲英國嘅一啲嘅勞工嘅權益啦、勞工法例啦，同埋揾工啊等等呢啲嘅情況啊，有啲咩復位啊咁樣實等一啲嘢咧。咁其實如果大家有睇英文故事都好啦，我哋都介紹過幾集，即係有關於英國嘅工作啦。咁其實都同樣地喺個分享過程裏邊都有啲嘅，即係有當然有好好嘅地方，亦都有啲係大家需要留意小心嘅地方嘅。係啦，咁所以我哋都係想搞一個勞工日，係啦，希望都大家可以相聚同埋了解多啲本地嘅工會嘅情況咁樣嘅。咁大家可以 mark 低佢係5月13號嘅晏晝，係啦。咁詳細啲個時間地點嗰啲咧，我哋會進一步會 send 出嚟俾大家嘅。OK， 擺翻個 email。咁啊，今日大家有留低個 email， 我哋都會 send 翻俾大家嘅。OK，my Cantonese is the end. It's okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And so let's start the webinar. This is why you've come here tonight. I'd like to welcome, as always, from the National Career Service, Ray Latourelle. And Ray is going to talk to us all about getting a job in driving jobs in the UK. Thank you, as always, for coming, Ray. Over to you, sir.
Right, good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to this session. Are people able to use the chat box, Matt, if they want to ask questions?
Well, there have been comments in there, but I'm glad that you said that. If you want to ask a question, at the bottom of your screen, it says ask a question. Just click on there. There's a big red button that says ask a question or suggest a topic, and you can ask the question. You can ask in English or you can ask in Cantonese, and Tai-Shing will translate the Cantonese. So just ask a question, or if you have any comments, put it in the chat at the side of the page.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So I just need to share my screen again, I think, don't I? So let me just do that. So just bear with me a second while I do that. So
while you're doing that, thank you to Rick, by the way, for translating some of the important stuff. Good stuff.
Okay. So can you see, just make sure you can see this, it's called Driving Your Career. Is that coming
I can
up?
see it, great.
Fabulous. Okay. So yes, my name's Ray Latourelle, National Career Service Advisor, and I'll be talking to you this evening about different types of jobs driving for a living. Okay. Just before I say any more about that, I'll just introduce you to my two dogs. Alfie and Jack, my two dogs. I'm doing this webinar from my house, and you may hear my dogs bark. If the doorbell rings or the phone rings, they'll bark. So I apologize if they make a noise. Okay. So we will cover this evening different types of jobs driving. So we'll have a look at some information about transport in the West Midlands. Okay, so some what we call market information. So the types of jobs, the number of jobs in different types of driving in the West Midlands. We'll have a look at HGV, heavy goods vehicle drivers, lorry drivers, bus drivers, coach drivers, taxi and private hire drivers, van drivers, tram drivers, chauffeurs, and train drivers. So there, as you can see, there are quite a lot of different types of driving jobs. So we'll have a look at those this evening. So in the UK, people can learn to drive as soon as they are 17 years old, and you have to take a theory test and a practical test. And when you've passed those, you are given something called a Category B license, and that allows you to drive a vehicle with not more than 8 passenger seats, and you're allowed to drive a vehicle up to 3.5 tons, 3,500 kilograms. So a reasonable size van or a minibus is the type of vehicle that you can drive with an ordinary car driving license. For most of the driving jobs I'm going to talk about in this webinar, further licenses are required. Okay. So to drive professionally, so to drive for your income, for your living, having the right personal qualities are more important than academic qualifications. So to be a professional driver, you need to be reliable, observant, able to concentrate, keep calm when under pressure as well. They're very important qualities for drivers. And to get the necessary licenses to be a professional driver, you have to go through medical and eyesight assessments to check that you are medically fit to drive a vehicle. Okay. So, depending on the driving job you have and who you work for, the employer, it is possible to get promotion to supervisory and management level jobs in some organizations. Some experienced drivers, experienced lorry drivers or bus drivers, some go on to become instructors and they train new drivers. In some cases, some drivers move into control office operations where they make sure that services run smoothly. They manage passenger transport schedules and things like that. So there are other roles, other types of jobs that are linked to driving jobs. The West Midlands, where I live, is known as the Golden Triangle. And what that is about is that about 90% of the British population is within a 4-hour drive of the West Midlands region. And that is a reason why there's a lot of transport and also storage jobs in the West Midlands, warehousing work, that sort of thing. Okay, there's a good motorway network in the West Midlands as well. Because it's at the centre of the UK, there are a lot of businesses connected with transport and storage of goods and raw materials. And 8 local authorities in the West Midlands are in the top 30 for the highest proportion of businesses in transport and storage. So Rugby, which is in Warwickshire, Rugby has the highest proportion of businesses which are devoted to transport and storage in the country. And on that table, it shows you the proportion, the percentage of businesses, how they've increased in 10 years. So in Rugby, for example, in 2011, 6.9% of all businesses were connected to transport and storage. And by 2021, that had risen to 17.5%. So across the region, there's been a lot of growth in transport and storage type work. Okay. And employment in transport is mostly concentrated in 7 local authority areas, which account for more than half of all employed workers in transport roles. Okay. And this tells you the number of people who are employed in transport. So in the West Midlands, about 75,000 people are employed in the transport sector. Okay. So, for example, there are 40,000 people work in freight transport by road. So that means people like lorry drivers, HGV drivers, also van drivers as well, and removal services. When people move house, for example, they have to have all their things moved, and they're in very large container type lorries. Okay, so a lot of people work in freight transport by road. All right. 4,500 people work in passenger rail transport between cities and towns in the West Midlands. Okay. And in the West Midlands, of course, we have the HS2 project, where a new high-speed railway is being built between London and Birmingham, and it's carrying on up into the north of the country as well. Okay, so that will create a lot of jobs in the West Midlands region. Okay. Other passenger land transport, so 13,000 people work in things as like bus drivers, coach drivers, those sorts of things. Okay. Passenger air transport, of course, that's about working in airports and so on. All right. But a lot of road transport jobs, as you can see. Okay. And then on this next screen, these are the top 20 types of jobs by number of employees. So in 2022, there are or were approximately 20,085 heavy goods vehicle drivers, people who drive lorries. Okay. Taxi and cab drivers and chauffeurs, 2,747 of them in the West Midlands. 2,424 van drivers. Okay. Over 1,500 train and tram drivers. Okay. And 860 rail transport operatives. So that would be a variety of staff that work on trains. Okay. So the ones that are highlighted in bold are all driving types of jobs. Okay. In the UK, we are very short of heavy goods vehicle drivers. After Brexit, when Britain left the European Union, and also after the COVID pandemic, which is still going on, of course, but when the COVID pandemic first hit in early 2020, a lot of overseas workers left the UK and didn't return, and a lot of them were drivers. And so the haulage industry, the transport industry, is putting pressure on government to offer more training places for heavy goods vehicle drivers to train. Okay, and there are what are called skills boot camps now, where people can train to be heavy goods vehicle drivers. Okay, so transport operatives and drivers account for about 38% of employees in transport across the West Midlands. Okay, so the top 5 occupations, so the top 5 types of jobs in transport in the West Midlands are large goods vehicle drivers, heavy goods vehicle drivers, HGV. It's the same thing. Okay, it's just sometimes they're known as LGV, but it's the same thing. Also, taxi drivers, cab drivers, and chauffeurs, and van drivers. So those are the most common types of jobs where people work. All right. A large number of drivers can also be found working in other areas like retail. So, for example, big supermarkets, Sainsbury's, Morrison's, Tesco, Asda, and others, they employ their own drivers. So they have lorry drivers to transport large amounts of supermarket goods. And of course, there's a lot of home deliveries now. People buy their shopping online and they have home deliveries. So a van driver will bring people's shopping to them in their own homes. All right. And of course, you also have drivers who work in the construction industry, of course, driving heavy plant and machinery, and even in the healthcare sector as well. So for example, you have ambulance drivers, paramedics, of course, and also hospital transport drivers as well that help people get to their hospital appointments. So lots of different places where drivers work. And these are the largest number of the number of vacancies in the West Midlands in the last 12 months. So between December 2021 and December 2022, there were 8,275 job vacancies advertised for van drivers. As so many more people do online shopping these days, use sites like Amazon, eBay, Etsy, these sorts of sites. Lots of people do online shopping now. People also very often do their supermarket shopping online and have their shopping delivered to them. So we've seen a big increase in the number of van drivers that are needed. And almost 7,500 job vacancies for lorry drivers as well. Okay. 534 job vacancies for bus and coach drivers. Okay, so 52 vacancies for train and tram drivers. These figures don't include job vacancies that are held by recruitment agencies because we don't have access to their data. So there are more jobs than the ones that I'm showing you here, but these are all advertised job vacancies on various job vacancy sites. Okay. Birmingham and Coventry had the highest number of vacancies for drivers in the last 12 months. Okay, so Birmingham, for example, the biggest city in the West Midlands. All right, so no great surprise that they had the most vacancies. So they had over 4,700 job vacancies. In Coventry, there were over 1,800 vacancies. And you can see the figures there for other parts of the West Midlands region as well. Okay. And we also did some analysis of the sorts of skills that employers were looking for from drivers and transport operatives in the West Midlands. So things like warehousing skills are also useful. Forklift truck driving is very common as well, being able to move what are called pallets around. That's where large amounts of goods are stored on a wooden pallet, for example, and it can be moved around by a forklift truck as well. All right, so quite a lot of different skills asked for by employers for drivers. And this gives an idea of the sort of pay that people get as drivers. Okay, so the most common wage range was between 19,000 a year and just under 22,000 pounds a year. Okay, the higher earners, some lorry drivers do earn high salaries. All right, so some lorry drivers who drive transport things like hazardous chemicals, fuel, those sorts of things, they have to be specially trained, and they can earn, really quite high salaries, well over 30,000 a year in some cases, even up to 50,000 in some cases. All right. So gives you an idea of the amount of money. So the one that's most common, that would be people like van drivers. So these sort of two highest bars here are sort of among people like van drivers particularly. But lorry drivers do tend to earn more. And quite a lot of lorry drivers, about 40% of lorry drivers are self-employed, so they work for themselves. Okay. And these are the top 15 employers in the West Midlands that have had job vacancies. Okay, so again, these figures don't include agency-based vacancies, but the Asda had the highest number of job vacancies. Yodel, National Express, that's a coach company. Okay, DHL, which is a delivery company, Tesco, a supermarket, National Express Group. I don't know what the difference is between those two things there, but that is a coach company. Iceland, which is a retailer of refrigerated goods and foods. Okay, so it gives you an idea of the some of the sort of major recruiters of people for drivers across the region. Okay, so it's a good idea to look at company websites, because some companies advertise their vacancies on their own websites. So apart from using job vacancy websites like Indeed and Reed and those sorts of sites, it can be a useful thing to look on companies' own websites too for vacancies. Okay. So what we'll do now is we'll have a look at the different types of jobs in driving. So we'll start off with heavy goods vehicle drivers, lorry drivers. Okay. HGV is the term that's used in the UK, heavy goods vehicle. LGV is the term that's used in Europe to describe lorry drivers, but we're talking about the same thing. Okay. So lorry drivers can work for haulage firms, large manufacturers. They can also work for retail companies, or they might own their own lorries and be self-employed. About 40% of lorry drivers are self-employed, in fact. So a lorry driver, apart from driving the vehicle, you would also help or supervise with the loading and the unloading of goods to make sure that the loads are secure. You have to plan and keep records of your routes. You have to record your deliveries and any goods that have to be returned. And also you have to do basic road maintenance. So just like you would a car, you need to check things like the oil, the water, and of course your tire pressures and so on. Okay, so routine maintenance work. And also government officials from an organization called the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency will do checks on your vehicle to make sure you're not smuggling illegal goods or have got illegal immigrants in your vehicle. So you have to give access to staff who work for that government department. Okay. So to be able to train to be an HGV driver, you have to have passed your car driving license. Okay. You must be at least 18. Okay. And you have to get what's called a category C driving license to drive lorries. Okay. Now there are different licenses for heavy goods vehicle drivers. So a category C1 license allows you to drive a vehicle that weighs between 3.5 tons and 7.5 tons, and you're allowed to tow a trailer up to 750 kilos. Okay, so it's known as a rigid vehicle. So it means that the axles are fixed, basically. All right. So the cab and the storage area of the lorry are all fixed together. They don't separate. Okay, that's what we mean by a rigid vehicle. Then there is the category C license that allows you to drive any lorry over 3.5 tons, but you're only allowed to tow a trailer up to 750 kilos. And then you've got the category CE or C plus E license, and that allows you to drive any lorry over 3.5 tons, and you can also tow a trailer over 750 kilos. So the very big lorries that you see on the roads and motorways, the driver of those big trailers, they will have got a CE license. Okay. And to get these licenses, you have to go through a training course. You have to do theory test, practical road test, on-road test, and an off-road test as well. So you have to show that you can maneuver the vehicle properly. So it's similar in some ways to a car driving test. Okay. But if you are a professional lorry driver in the UK and Europe too, you also have to hold a qualification called the Driver CPC. It stands for the Driver Certificate of Professional Competence. Okay, and that is a requirement if you earn your living from being a lorry driver, and that has to be updated every 5 years. And the the lorry driving license that you get is part of the CPC qualification. So if you do an HGV training course, you will train to drive a lorry. You'll train towards one of those licenses. You choose which one you want to do, but you will also do the driver CPC qualification as part of your training as well. Okay, and there are different ways of getting training to get that qualification. Okay, that link is a very good one. That if you go on to that one, it gives you a guide on how to become a lorry or a bus driver as well. All right, so it tells you exactly what you have to do if you wanted to train to be a lorry or a bus driver. Bus drivers. So bus drivers, you would, apart from driving the bus, you would also take fares, you would check passengers' bus passes, you'll answer inquiries as well. Passengers might ask you questions about the journey, things like that. So the driver is responsible for the safety of the passengers, so they must follow the bus company's regulations. Okay, and also a bus driver has to have enough understanding of the mechanics of the vehicle to know if the bus is developing a fault. Okay. So apart from learning how to drive the bus, you also need to be able to deal with passengers politely and efficiently. If you're a bus driver, you might be expected to work early in the morning. Some drivers, for example, bus drivers take children to school. All right. Some bus drivers will work late into the evening if there are, late bus journeys available in towns and cities, and of course at weekends as well. Some employers offer part-time working as well, but you do need to have very good attendance and timekeeping. Very, very important, because if you're not reliable, then the bus doesn't run. So that can cause a lot of problems. Okay. Now, if you want to train to be a bus driver, again, you have to have your Category B car license, and you must be at least aged 18. But you do a different training course. So lorry drivers do their Category C license. Bus drivers do what's called a Category D license, and they also do a CPC qualification as well. So very, very much like lorry drivers. The bus driving license is known as a PCV license. It stands for Passenger Carrying Vehicle License. Okay. And to get those, you have to go on a bus driving course, and you take theory and practical tests. And some companies do provide this training for new recruits. I've often seen, when I've been driving my car, that in the back of a bus, you'll see an advert in the window saying that they are recruiting trainee drivers. All right, so that can be very good because they pay for all the training and give you a job at the end of that as well. Okay. And how long the training takes depends on whether you've had any previous experience, but it usually takes several weeks to train to be a bus driver, as it does a lorry driver as well. Usually takes about 16 weeks on average. Okay. Most bus services are provided by one of the large bus operators, such as Stagecoach or First Bus, but there are also small local area companies that run bus services as well. Okay. And on completion of their training, bus drivers they start on about £22,000 per year. Okay, but pay rates do vary from company to company. Okay, and you can earn more money through doing overtime as well. And if you are a bus driver, you usually have a free bus pass yourself, which is one of the perks of working as a bus driver. Then we've got coach drivers. It's really very similar if you train to be a coach driver. Okay, you need to be a very experienced driver to get into coach driving. Okay, and most coach companies are quite small, and they don't usually train their own drivers. So very often people that want to be coach drivers will have to do their PCV license and driver CPC training course before they apply for jobs. Okay, so whereas with bus companies, you can very often get your training paid for by the employer, it's not so common with coached companies. Coach drivers, their job is more varied. Okay, so if you drive a coach, you might do coach trips for school trips, you might do outings, you might work for a national company operating long distance services, so driving all over the UK, but even abroad as well. So if you're a coach driver, you may have time when you're away from home quite a lot if you're doing long trips. Okay, so you could work for a tour operator, and they do trips around Britain or Europe. Okay, and as I said, if you work on coach tours, you may be away from your base and indeed your home for some time. So you do have to check the mechanical state of your vehicle, because that's very important. Okay. And also, as a coach driver, you have to load and unload the vehicle. So bus drivers don't generally do that at all. whereas coach passengers will bring luggage with them and so on. So the coach driver will have to load that on as well. And very often, coach drivers also act as a guide. So they will talk to the passengers using a microphone about the route that they're driving on. Okay. Sometimes you will have a tour guide that accompanies the coach driver who will do that. Okay. But it's a more varied job than being a bus driver. Then we've got taxi and private hire drivers. So taxi drivers, now they drive what are called hackney carriage or black cab cars. And private minicab drivers, they have to hold a license which is given by the local council. All right. Or if you're in London, it's called Transport for London. So you have to have a special license to drive what's called a hackney carriage or black cab. Okay. Taxis are more tightly controlled, but if you are a taxi driver, you are allowed to wait at what we call taxi ranks, which means like outside railway stations, outside of airports and things like that. There are rows which are allocated to taxi drivers, and they are allowed to wait in those areas and advertise their vehicle for hire on the streets. Okay. Private hire vehicles, on the other hand, are not allowed to do that. All right. So some people, for example, will run an airport taxi service. So they will drive people from their home to an airport when they want to go on holiday. All right. Now, they also have to have a license to do that, but they get all their work through telephone or radio control bookings. All right. Quite a lot of taxi drivers are self-employed, so they run their own business, but some are employed by a taxi company, for example. They might own their own vehicle or they might lease one from the company they're working for. Okay. In some areas of the UK, it's possible to work as a driver through a taxi app service such as Uber, which you may have heard of before. And the requirements are very similar to those described above. So again, you need a license. So Uber has to have been registered with a local council area to operate vehicles. And that link there takes you to how you can become an Uber driver, what the requirements are. Okay. A bit more about taxi drivers. So taxi and private hire drivers, so they must be at least 21, so slightly older. Must have held a driving license, that's a full driving license, after they pass their test for at least a year, in some cases up to 3 years, depending on the employer that they want to work for. They have to undergo background checks because taxi drivers are in a very responsible position. You know, someone who is a passenger in a taxi could be very vulnerable, for example, and there have been some awful crimes committed by taxi drivers who committed some really bad offences on women particularly. So these days, employers require people to have a criminal record check, okay, before they can be employed, because they're working with potentially vulnerable passengers. Okay, and also taxi drivers, they have to have a good knowledge of the area where they work. And in London, taxi drivers have to pass a test. It's called the knowledge test. And some parts of the country have similar types of tests. So it tests people's knowledge of the area, their knowledge of the roads in the area, those sorts of things. Okay. Van drivers, we've had a lot more van driver jobs come up in recent years. Many different companies employ van drivers. So van drivers deliver all sorts of goods to retail outlets, to businesses, and also individuals. Okay, a lot more home deliveries these days than there used to be. So some van drivers work for supermarkets, and people order their shopping online and it's delivered to their home. People who buy goods on platforms like eBay, Amazon, Etsy, these sorts of websites, again, the van driver will deliver those goods to the person's home. So a lot more opportunities nowadays for van drivers. Okay. So delivery drivers, they have to load and unload their van. They have to check the goods. They have to plan their routes. They also deal with any paperwork. These days, a lot of van drivers use a handheld device to record that they've delivered the goods. Okay. And as I've said already, the growing popularity of online shopping has meant a lot more job opportunities nowadays for van drivers. Okay. Just some examples of employers. So food producers, the supermarket chains, but also working for online companies as well. Okay, lots of different employers employ van drivers. Okay, and to drive a van, as I've mentioned already, to drive a van, you need to have a full Category B driving license. That allows you to drive a van up to 3.5 tons in weight. Okay, anything bigger than that, you'd have to have a C1 class license. Okay, but Category B allows you to drive a reasonably large van. Some van drivers will sell goods from their vans, like they might sell ice cream, for example, or fresh fish or groceries. These sorts of drivers very often run their own business, or they might buy what's called a franchise. So that is where you buy into an existing brand, okay, and you sell goods for that brand, but you run it as a self-employed person. So, as I say, to drive a van up to 3.5 tons, you can drive a van with a Category B driving license. That's the car driving license. But anything heavier than that, then you would need to have a C1 license for a van. Okay. There are now apprenticeships for van drivers. It's called a level 2 urban driver apprenticeship. All right, and these sorts of all sorts of apprenticeships now are open to adults. Some people think that apprenticeships are only for young people who have left school, but apprenticeships are open to all ages nowadays. So an apprenticeship is where you're taken on as a trainee, really. So you're learning and getting training and earning a wage at the same time. Okay. Then we've got tram drivers. Okay, so there are several tram systems in England. So trams run on rails, but they run through city centres. So, for example, in Birmingham, there are trams. Okay. So as trams operate in very busy areas, tram drivers need to have very quick reactions. They have to be aware of pedestrians and other traffic as well. And a tram driver will sit in a cab, which is away from where the passengers are. Okay. So to become a tram driver, you have to hold a full car driving license, a Category B license, and also you need good customer care skills. In fact, customer care skills are useful for many different types of driving. Okay, so if you are a van driver or a lorry driver, you're very often the first point of contact for people you are delivering to. So having a good way with customers, being polite to customers is very useful. So if you have had a background of working with customers in some way, that is useful. Okay. Vacancies for tram drivers are advertised on tram company websites. Okay. And you train in the job, and there is an apprenticeship for tram drivers. Okay, it's called Passenger Transport Drivers Apprenticeship. It could be bus, coach, or tram. Okay. Chauffeurs. These are people who drive very rich people or very famous people, celebrities, high ranking politicians, important people. So they drive them in usually a large, posh car. Okay, so experienced car drivers can work as a chauffeur for perhaps a private household, or they might work for a celebrity or business people as well. Okay. There is a magazine in the UK called The Lady, and that's a magazine where quite often you see vacancies for people to work as chauffeurs. Okay. Some companies hire chauffeurs for special events, such as dances and weddings. Okay, so you need to have a very good appearance. You need to be very smart, very efficient, and very polite, and also, of course, to be a very good driver as well if you're going to work as a chauffeur. Okay. Then we've got train drivers. So train drivers work alone in a cab, but they have to have very quick reactions. They have to be very responsible and very reliable, because a train can weigh several hundred tons and they move at great speed. So, not everybody can be a train driver. You have to have very good reactions. To become a train driver, many employers require that people have got qualifications called GCSEs in maths and English. They are qualifications that people in the UK take when they are age 16. But if you have got qualifications from overseas, there is a way of checking how your qualifications from your country compare to those of the UK. I can tell you more about that if you want to find out more about that. Okay. When you apply to be a train driver, you do have to pass a number of aptitude tests. That includes things like how quick your reactions are as well. All right. That link on the screen takes you to a website called the Train Drivers Academy, and that tells you how to get in to become a train driver. Okay, pretty well paid job being a train driver, but it's not always easy to get into. But if you have a look at that site, it will tell you about how people train to become train drivers. The railway industry is a major employer in the UK. So the industry is divided into what we call train operating companies. There are nearly 30 mainline train operating companies that run passenger services. So, for example, Virgin is an example of one of those companies. And each train operating company will operate train services in a particular region of the country or over particular routes. Okay. And the recruitment and training to those companies, it varies from one company to another. Okay. London and other big cities do have additional local rail services. So, for example, in London, we've got the very famous London Underground, which also train drivers work on. There are freight companies. So there's a company called DB Cargo UK, and that carries a variety of cargo freight across the UK and also through the Channel Tunnel to European destinations. So that's where goods and materials are being transported by rail. The railway infrastructure, an organisation called Network Rail owns, repairs and develops the railway infrastructure, and there are about 20,000 miles of track, 30,000 bridges, viaducts and tunnels, and also level crossings and signals as well. Okay, and 20 key railway stations are managed by the Network Rail. The others, though, are managed by the train operating companies. Okay. And then you've got other services working for the rail organisations. So, for example, there are catering companies, fire services, engineering services, rolling stock services. So, there are companies, employers that provide those sorts of services for the rail industry. Okay. But most train drivers will work for one of the train operating companies. Okay. So, next steps from today. Now, I will email these slides to Matt and Yusuf, so I'm happy for people to have these slides, which I think would be helpful, so you can have a look at them again. But things that you can do next to help you find out more. If you look on the National Careers Service website, you'll find what we call job profiles, all right, about jobs in things like delivery and storage, and also jobs in transport as well. Okay. If you are ready to look for driving jobs are advertised on some of the better known vacancy websites like Indeed, Adzuna, Reed, Monster. Also the government Find a Job website is a very good one to look for driving jobs as well. Okay, so any of those you can use. Okay. All right. So I'll click on one of those links for you. So this takes you to the National Careers Service website, and then this is about jobs in transport. So these are all sorts of different types of jobs in transport. So it does include air jobs connected to the airlines, but also driver jobs as well. So you can find out more about being a bus driver or a coach driver. You can find out more about being a chauffeur, a delivery driver. Okay. But there's other things in here as well. Forklift drivers, they work in warehouses very often. All right. Lorry driver. So you can check out any of those. So you click on the job and then it will tell you about what the work is like, what money they earn, the hours that they work, how you get into that type of work. All right. And you can also find out about jobs which are similar. So, for example, a tanker driver is a lorry driver that drives hazardous materials, chemicals, fuel, that sort of thing. Delivery van driver is another one. A removals worker is someone who works for a company that moves people's possessions for them when they move house. And you can also check out bus driver, coach driver, and train driver. Okay. So I hope that's been of some help to you and given you some ideas and hopefully given you a better understanding of the different types of jobs there are in the driving sector. All right. So Matt, I will send the slides to yourself and Yusuf, and I'm very happy for you to share them with the guys in the group. Okay.
Mhm. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Ray. A few things that it's worth mentioning about in there. I have put them in the chat, but I'm going to mention them again now. Our partners at the WEA, they are running free online courses for ESOL learners. So for people whose first language is not English, you can do this course, which is about passing your driving theory test. So if you need to pass your driving theory test in the UK, and it also looks at the practical test as well, that's a free course you can go on. The link is in the chat. And I think it's also worth saying that a lot of our driving jobs are covered by trade unions. Now, it depends on the job. So if you're a taxi driver, it could be RMT, GMB, Unite. It depends on which area. but the train drivers in particular, almost every train driver is in a union. There is a union just for train drivers called ASLEF, and that's why they are very well paid, because the train drivers are very strong in the trade unions. So that's that. We have 4 questions, so I'm going to go through these. One of them from Choi Tak Yu said, "If I'm weak at English, can I become a driver to deliver something?" I mean, I said to Choi Tak that basically you can with a weak English. You know, some jobs are better than others, perhaps, but I think English is not so much of a barrier,
it's not. It's because usually as a delivery driver, you probably won't even have any contact with the customer. You'll just deliver the goods to the door, you know, and that's it. So no, it's just that being a competent driver and a good timekeeper are by far the most important things. Yeah.
There is. It says, how common is it for van and lorry drivers to be employed by recruitment agencies? And that's from Ying.
Yeah, I mean, both can be. You can register with, there are a lot of recruitment sites, recruitment agencies around. I couldn't say how common, probably a bit more common for van drivers than lorry drivers. Lorry drivers tend to be employed by an organisation or are self-employed, but there tends to be van driving jobs are more agency-based. There is a website in the UK called Agency Central, and that's a website where you can search for agencies in particular types of jobs and by postcode. All right, so it's called Agency Central. Very good site, and you can register with as many of those as you want to. Okay,
Okay, that's very good, thanks. And Ying also has another question. It says, what are the common types of pay package like, e.g. paid by hour, by trip, commission, etc.?
Yeah, it can be any of those, to be honest. I mean, if you know, some people are on an hourly rate, for example, if they're on like a 0 hours contract basis, for example. People more commonly are on a regular salary if they're a driver. So if they're employed by an organization, they will just be on a regular monthly salary. Okay, and obviously that will vary from employer to employer. Okay. Lorry drivers tend to be better paid, you know, but the hours can be very long. If you're a lorry driver, if you're doing long haul work, you could be on, you know, working very long hours. But salaries are, yeah, sorry.
And isn't it true, Ray? I think it's worth put in here both lorry and bus drivers, but not van drivers, is that you have to wait every so often. You can't drive too many hours together, and they have a thing called a tachograph, whereas you sometimes have to pull over and park.
That's very true.
And have a rest.
Yeah, you as a lorry driver, you are very carefully what we call scrutinized and watched, and these days modern lorries have got a lot of in-cab technology as well, which can sort of track what you're doing. So yes, you do have to take regular breaks as a lorry driver. No,
but that's not van drivers or Uber drivers, I don't think. So so that's I've put the Agency Central website in the chat. So agencycentral.co.uk. One final point is you talked about the tram drivers. Now, in Birmingham, the Midland Metro, it's actually run by the Midland Metro Alliance, which is the West Midlands Combined Authority, and they were looking for drivers and for other roles as well. So if you are interested in that, talk to me, because I know the lady who's head of recruitment there. So I can put her in touch. We have come to the end of our time, I think, for this. Now I know Tai Xing is going to be getting people in different rooms. Tai Xing,
we have a question. Can you listen? A guy asked, if we take a Hong Kong driving license to UK to change to the UK driving license, is it need to exam the theory, go through the theory test, then be a van driver? He say he had a B1 license.
Right.
So I don't know what's B1 license.
Yeah, that's like UK car driving license. I would recommend, if you've got questions about your driving license, go on to the DVLA website. It stands for the Driver Vehicle Licensing Agency, DVLA. That's the site. It's based in Swansea, and they issue driving licenses, and they're very knowledgeable. They've got a good website as well, which so you can find out
Can
about
you
what you need.
Oh,
The
okay.
DVLA. Yeah.
I just take the link.
Yeah, I've just put the link in. I mean, I think, I don't know the answer 100%, Tai Shing, to that question, but I think you have, after a couple of years, you have to take the theory test. And again, that's why the WEA are running this course, because I've been on this course that they're running as an online course, and all the people on it are Ukrainians and Afghanis, because they were finding they lived in the UK for a period, and then even if they have a license, because all the Ukrainians had car licenses in Ukraine, but they needed to apply for a UK one, and they needed to do the driving theory test. So, and basically, when you get your provisional license in the UK, it lasts for 10 years. You do your driving theory test first, and then you do the practical test. You can't do the practical test, the one on the road, first. You have to do the theory. Only when you've passed the theory can you pass the practical. But the theory, I mean, most people pass it first time. It's not that hard. But if you want help passing that, the WEA are running courses, and the link is in the chat.
It's also similar with lorry driving as well, because they have to do a theory test as well. But there's more to it with lorry driving. Okay, so it's more involved. But the link that's in the slides about how to become a lorry or bus driver is very good, because it explains exactly how you train and qualify to be a lorry driver or a bus driver. Okay, so you'll see that in the slides when you get those. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Ray. Any more questions, Tai Shing?
Oh, I just came on this to have a promotion. We have a YouTube for the introduce the bus driver. How to say this is we get 2 Hong Kong to share in the YouTube channel。大家可以去呢個英倫故事裏邊咧，之前我哋都錄製咗一集係關於呢個巴士司機嘅，係有兩位巴士司機喺度分享即係分享咗都得意嘅，係啦。我最深刻印象嘅就係大家去睇下啦，呢個手勢 ，let go let go let go。If the bus driver can't let go, that's it. You no need to pay the bill. No need to pay the fare. This is very funny. OK， 大家可以入翻呢個YouTube channel 裏邊去睇啦。OK， 係啦。咁finally I did more promotion for the following for the coming events。第一樣嘢咧打緊個分組咧，會有2個分組嘅，一個咧就係關於巴士司機啦，係啦，一個係關於一啲delivery 嘅，係啦。咁我當然啦，因為今日集資時間就唔到一啲貨車司機嘅點成嘅，咁同埋跟住咧，我會 send 喺分組裏邊咧，我哋會 send 或者跟住之後我啲 email 咧會 send 翻一個嘅，我哋開咗個 voice group 係俾香港嘅嗰啲嘅司機就擺晒可以擺晒去，可以做啲 sharing 啊等等咁樣嘅。咁大家有興趣即係想長期關注關於司機呢啲嘅工作等等嗰啲咧，裏邊有啲送外賣啊、貨車啊、巴士啊嘅司機都喺裏邊嘅，咁大家可以喺裏邊去取下經咁樣啦。咁呢啲同樣地，我哋之前嘅 teacher assistant 啊、healthcare assistant 啊、做 warehouse 啊都有啲咁嘅 group 嘅，大家都係過下料，大家都係或者甚至喺裏邊去呻下都 OK 嘅。我都成日都臨中都喺呢啲 group 裏邊去呻下嘅，咁歡迎大家入 group 啦，係啦。咁我哋可能 完咗講座，一完之後咧3分鐘咧就大家可以入翻嗰條 link。我 email 咗啦，同埋喺個我打多次send 多次嗰兩條 link 出嚟啊，大家就可以入翻呢兩條 link 裏邊去做分組嘅。OK 嗱，依條 link 咧我啱打出嚟先啊，係外賣嘅。
Okay, are we all done then?
Okay. What? Do this.
My dog's still asleep.
之前有兩條 link 係 send 出所以 we send we take the link again.
Okay.
You share the link. You copy the link again. Sorry. You can see the link.
I can see the links. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's two Google links there. So yeah.
Yeah. These two links can another one. Please switch.
Yeah, they're the same, but one's got a woman sign on the end. Yeah,
These two link 大家可以入去其中是但一組裏邊再分享傾偈咁樣嘅。OK， 咁最後尾都多謝TUC 啦，同埋National 個 Training Centre 嗰邊嘅分享啦。We are many thanks to Matt and TUC and the National Training Centre. And see you my next webinar. I think will be in the 24 to the May.
Yeah.
Okay, and see you.
Okay, and thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thank you very much for Tai Xing again for organising it, and for Ray for doing his stuff as always. And of course, you can't see him, but Yusuf behind the scenes has been helping with the computers.
Brilliant.
So thank you very much. We'll see you again soon.
See you later.
Night.
好，大家喺3分鐘之後可以入去個谷，入翻佢兩條 link 裏邊噶啦。Thank you. See you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.